Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. This is FiveXFive and I'm Simo. If you haven't already, grab your fave bevy, a seat, and let's get into it. And we have to talk about Antman and the Wasp, Quantumania. This is going to be a non-spoiler review, so don't worry, I'm not going to ruin anything for you. I'm just going to speak in general terms and I'm not going to reveal any plot points or anything like that. I had mixed feelings going into this movie. I wasn't too excited about it. I mean, I was Ant-Man curious, but I didn't really have high expectations for the movie. That said, I am happy to say that the movie is better than I thought it would be. It is better than the reviews led me to believe. So, I'm a little bit burnt out on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I'll come back to that in a second. Right off the top, I enjoyed the movie. I am not entirely sure why the reviews are so negative. It's not a brilliant movie, but it's definitely not an awful movie. Now, getting into the nitty-gritty of the movie, let's talk about that. I mentioned earlier I am getting a little tired of the MCU. I've never been a gigantic Marvel fan. I am a gigantic superhero fan, but I've always been more of a DC fan. For me, the Marvel comic universe is about the X-Men first and foremost. It is then about Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four, and then about the Avengers. And then after that, we're getting even the Avengers, you're getting into kind of B and C list characters that even Marvel comic fans generally don't care too much about. So Marvel's made $1 bazillion on monetizing their third stringer characters, and we haven't even gotten to their A-list characters yet since Marvel got the rights back to their A-list properties, which is, of course, the X-Men, Fantastic Four, and Spider-Man. Spider-Man they only have partial rights back to, but you get my point. We have yet to see the best Marvel content that Marvel has to offer. Hopefully it's coming, right? So going into the Marvel movies, I'm tired. I've really enjoyed the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I don't want to take away from that at all. I think they've done amazing, brilliant things with the franchise as a whole, and they've made audiences care about characters that generally are less important in the Marvel universe and the least popular characters, like the Guardians of the Galaxy, for example. It's genius that James Gunn was able to do that with the Guardians property. It's going to be so much easier to make that kind of magic happen for Marvel's more fleshed out, more developed characters and properties like the X-Men, Fantastic Four. So going into this now post-Infinity War and post-Endgame phase and post-Thanos phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I can kind of see and understand why a lot of critics are kind of turning on Marvel, and I can see why a lot of fans are kind of turning on Marvel as well, because I think they kind of mirror my sentiment, and my sentiment is just I just don't care about a lot of these characters, and they're making movies now about characters that the audience and fans are just not that invested in. They didn't have 10 years to get invested in those characters. So I think that's where a lot of the fatigue is coming from. It's not superhero fatigue, it's fatigue over characters that you're being sold that you don't have a connection to, right? It's a pitch, but there's no connection. So going into this movie, I mean, sure, I like Ant-Man, but he's one of the least important characters of the Avengers, and I think most audiences probably feel the same. Now, that said, I've also stayed up to date with my Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff, so I've watched WandaVision and I've watched Loki. So I knew what was coming. I knew Kang was going to be the antagonist of this movie and that he's being built up. And this is his big Marvel Cinematic Universe debut, where we get to find out that this is going to be the big bad going forward in the Marvel movies, and I think that's great. And I think they've done a good job. But going into this movie, yeah, I can kind of see why critics are kind of like, yeah, whatever, because I just don't think they cared as much. Now, that said, I don't think it's a flaw with the movie. The movie is fun, and it's just got a slightly bigger scope than the previous Ant-Man movies, so that might be a little bit difficult for some fans that were looking for more of a guy next door vibe to their superheroes. The stakes in this movie are much higher. If you're not into that, you might have a problem with the movie. And I think that actually that might be where some audiences might be divided. This movie has a very Jules Verne Journey to the Center of the Earth vibe to it. It's not an exaggeration to say, because you're literally shrinking and journeying to the center of the universe, right? It's the same idea, um, and the same scope, right? And that theme is inherently kind of bizarre and weird in itself, right? And I think that is leaning into some of the more fantastical and nerdy and weird nature that comic books allow you to do, comic book stories allow you to do. So that in itself might alienate some more mainstream comic fans that are looking for just a really more basic superhero brawl, and rather than bizarre creatures and weird anything. I don't know. The problem with that is, because you are journeying to the center of the universe, thematically speaking, and seeing all these bizarre things, like you're playing with the seriousness of the tone in a sense, and that's really cool for some fans, but for other fans it's going to also kind of take away from the seriousness of the tone, and you get these weird bizarre creatures and comedic side relief moments, and I feel like they're not contrasting each other as much as they're in conflict with each other and taking away from each other. So I do think that's one of the problems the movie has. In terms of the cast, everyone is back, of course. Everybody you cared about. Hope has nothing to do. I really am sad about that. Wasp has nothing to do in this movie. I don't understand how she's gotten such a. She's like the second headlining character on the Ant-Man and the Wasp, and the Wasp has nothing to do in the movie. Cassie, Ant-Man's daughter, gets more screen time and more character development than Hope. I don't think that Cassie needed any of that. She's got movies coming up in the future, let's be honest. Marvel is setting up a Young Avengers movie where she's going to be in it. They have time to develop her character. It didn't need to be in this movie, and I think that really actually hurts this movie, and it's time that could have and should have been better spent on Hope. Janet is actually like the original Wasp, and I guess you could argue she's the Wasp that the title refers to, but she gets far more character development and screen time than Hope does. And I love that, actually. Michelle Pfeiffer steals the show. I mean, we could have had a whole movie about Janet, about the Wasp. I feel like that would have been amazing. I was totally into all the stuff that had to do with Janet and the backstory that she has that gets revealed. It could have really played into her relationship with Hope a lot better. And there's a few ties to that, but they really don't milk that at all. And they should have. As for the actual Ant-Man scenes, Paul Rudd is great, of course. I feel like he's in the wrong movie here, though. Like, everyone got the memo that they were taking the stakes up for this movie, for this third part of the Ant-Man trilogy, except for Paul Rudd, because Paul Rudd is kind of just trying to do the same thing he did in the previous movies and be this really small, no pun intended, a really small kind of down-to-earth character, rather than be absorbed by all the big events going on around the character. And I feel like he plays it too tight, and it stops working, because at some point it's almost like the character is in denial about how big the stakes around him got, and he's not reacting to it appropriately. At least from my perspective, I feel like some of his, let's keep things simple and down to earth quips and jokes, I feel like they took away from the seriousness and the tone of the overall movie, and the stakes of the plot. But that said, I mean, he's still a delight to watch on screen. He's a lot of fun. I just do think the way they played him down really kind of took away from the scope of the movie. The scope of the story, I should say. I really enjoyed almost all of the movie. I think the movie does a really good job of staying really character driven, even though I would have preferred some of the characters got more spotlight than others. What is there and what is focused on is really good. It's a really nice chemistry between all of the main cast, so I have no complaints there. I think where a lot of maybe critics slammed this movie, or where they ran into problems, was the third act, where you get like the formulaic giant CGI battle. Again, it's not a spoiler, it's in the trailers. There's obviously going to be a giant formulaic CGI battle. I feel like that scene should have been cut entirely, or it should have been played off screen or in the distance or something like that. In that scene, there's so much that happens. It's all big spectacle, and you kind of come to expect it from a Marvel movie. But in this specific movie, because the movie has been so character driven up until this point, it becomes like, I don't know, a little bit of a shock to the audience. You go from being this very intimate, character-driven movie to big spectacle. So I feel like these big CGI fight scenes should have just been kind of in the distance, and the characters are aware, doing their thing, and we're focusing on them while those events are happening in the background. I feel like that would have been a more effective way to show the events of this movie. I do think that this scene is what keeps the movie from being great. If they had taken it out or done it differently, like I said, I think this movie would have been an easy 8 out of 10. Instead, I think it's holding it back, and it's more like a 6.5 or a 7.5 at best, but instead of like an 8 or even a 9 out of 10, if they had done this scene differently, because it pulls the movie back in a few ways that are kind of like, just takes you out of the movie. I think the only other real criticism I have of the movie would have to be that it's so interconnected at this point. If you haven't watched Loki, if you haven't watched WandaVision, if you haven't watched every Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, I think you're going to have problems following what's happening. You're going to be like, where did this guy come from? They do let you know, and they tie into the characters and the backstory in a really good way. It's easy to follow in that sense, but the average fan might be a little stuck. They might need a little bit more explanation. I think the choice to make the movie about Kang and the multiverse was really ambitious, but I've never been a big fan of multiverse stories in the comics because they're really hard to follow without getting all the back issues. And that kind of ties into my earlier criticism of, you have to watch the WandaVision shows, you have to watch the Loki shows, you have to watch all the previous cinematic movies. Like, you have to watch all the back issues, the back episodes in this case, to follow everything. And I think when you're doing multiverse media, whether it's comics or in movies or TV, I think it's just generally too complicated for the average fan to follow. Only the diehard fans are really going to really connect with this. That's just my opinion. I don't think it's bad, but I think you're really you're trying to really appeal to a niche audience at that point, and you're shrinking your audience, your target audience at that point. I think the multiverse is too big of an idea to effectively do well in media, and I don't think it was a good idea for this whole phase. But we'll see going through, right? Marvel can completely prove me wrong and prove me completely full of crap. We will see. I don't think it's going to happen, but we will see. I want to end on a positive note. Again, I really enjoyed the movie. It is way better than the reviews will lead you to believe. It is a lot of fun. Does it have some problems in the third act? Yes, absolutely. But getting there to that third act is a lot of fun, and you can kind of wave away the problems in the third act. It's not perfect for sure, but it's still a lot of fun. The problems in that third act are not so bad that you will hate the movie and you will walk out like frustrated or anything like that. They take you out of the movie and that's it. So this movie is worth your time, despite what the reviews would have you say. Don't think otherwise. It's still a fun movie. And if you're an invested Marvel fan, you're totally not going to have a problem with the movie. If you're a more casual fan, that's where you might bump into some problems. That's it. That's all I got. That's a wrap for now. Don't forget to click like and subscribe. I'll see you all in the next video. Stay safe and look out for each other.